Not as human beings see does God see, because people see the appearance, but the Lord looks into the heart. How do we learn to see as God sees? Last Sunday, we were told the great story. These are all from the Gospel of John, these great dialogues, more striking than in any of the other three Gospels. We were told about the Samaritan woman who met Jesus at the well, if you remember Peter, Paul, and Mary. And he told me everything I ever did, which is not always good news. That's what Jesus said to the woman at the well, and she became a believer. She was nameless. We don't know her name. This Sunday, we have not the theme of living water, which is baptism, but this Sunday we have light. Jesus is the light of the world, and sight and seeing. In fact, in the early church, baptism was referred to as illumination, to be illumined. All right? So here you have a very fascinating thing, a man who's nameless, a man born blind, and so on. Let me take a quick path through the readings and then come back and make some specific points. The first reading is on the book of Samuel, probably 1,000 years before the time of Christ. And there is the line that I just read, not as man sees does God see, because we just see appearances, but the Lord looks into the heart. Do not judge just from appearances, all right? That would kill the fashion industry. Boom, gone. Do not judge just from appearances. The other day, I shouldn't tell you this, but out in rural Kansas, I was driving a Maserati. This is not after the example of Pope Francis, but somebody else owned it and said, take it for a ride, and I did. And oh, how sweet. And I was talking to a friend of mine, a woman who said, yep, men with their cars, women with their fashions. Either way, it's all about being seen. So the first reading, we want to cut through the surface and get beyond the appearance. The second reading is very clear from Ephesians. It's probably a baptismal sermon. You were once, notice, not in darkness. You were once darkness. And then it says, now you are not in light, you are light. So it has to do with the very nature of who we are and what the transformation is. Fruitless works of darkness, expose them. Exposed by the light, they become visible. Everything that is visible is light. And then it ends with Christ is the light. And then the gospel, which you just heard read, Jesus says at the beginning, he says, I am the light of the world. I am the light of the world. Jesus is the light of the world, a blind man from birth. And there's a number of things. I would just like to, I really like this blind guy. I don't know what his name is, as I mentioned, but he has some great lines. If you remember, those of us of a certain vintage, Dragnet. Yes, this is an older congregation. If I used this line at USC, they'd have no idea. But you remember Jack Webb, and when he'd be interviewing somebody, what would he say? Just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. This guy does the facts. So listen to what his lines are. They're just great. It says, he starts out, and they say, where is he? He's been cured. He says, I don't know, period. And then they say, well, how did you get your eyes fixed? What happened? He said, he put clay on my eyes, and I washed, and now I see. Very abbreviated. Great short lines. And then they said, who do you say? What do you say about him? He says, he's a prophet. Be careful, you're going to see this more and more with the Gospel of John. The next line says, now the Jews did not believe, the Jews. The Gospel of John is the latest of the Gospels, and very likely by that time, when it was written, the Christian community and the Jewish community were going, shoo. And there was a lot of conflict. And this story about the parents, they were afraid of being thrown out of the synagogue, that pretty much, we feel, at least in the Catholic scholarship and tradition, was colored a great deal by that history. At any rate, he goes on, and a second time they called him. These are the Pharisees. And they take the high ground, the religious people. Give God the praise. These jerks are blind, though they see. He says, give God the praise. We know that this man is a sinner. They accuse Jesus, whoever it was that cured him. What does the man say? He didn't start really an argument yet, but he says, if he's a sinner, I do not know. I make no judgment. Smart dude. And then he goes on, he says, one thing I do know is that I was blind and now I see. The facts, ma'am. Just give me the facts. So it's here. But then the blind man outwits the religious leaders. Love it, don't you? It says here, why? He says, I told you already. He said, they answered him again, well, how did your eyes get open? He says, why do you want to hear it again? The facts, I just told you. Do you want to become his disciples? Ooh. Goes back. They ridiculed him and said, you are that man's disciple. We are disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses. We do not know where this guy is from. And then listen to the logic of his response. The man answered and said to them, this is what is so amazing, that you do not know where he is from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but if one is devout and does his will, he listens to him. It is unheard that anyone ever opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he would not be able to do anything. Well, this really aggravates. This really aggravates. So do they respond to the argument? No. What they do is they say, you were born totally in sin. It's like saying, you're a jerk. They don't know how to deal with this blind man who can see. And then the question comes along, Jesus goes and finds him. Jesus seeks him out. Even though this guy can see, Jesus continues to reach out. It says, when Jesus heard that they had thrown him out, he found him. He looked for him. And he said, do you believe in the Son of Man? The guy says, who is he, sir, that I may believe in him? And then imagine, picture yourself at some quiet moment, having a sense of Jesus in front of you and saying this, you have seen him. The one speaking with you is he. Do you believe in me? Do you believe in Jesus? And then he says, I do believe, Lord. And then he worshiped him. It's a great gospel. Okay, a couple of points that I think are worth making. The first one, this man in the gospel gradually comes to faith. He first calls him a prophet. He's not sure about things. And eventually Jesus appears to him and he ends up saying, you are the Son of Man, and he worships him. Okay, so it's a gradual process. Seeing is something you learn. That may sound counterintuitive, but it's true. You actually learn how to see. I was in Kansas, and I was visiting some friends, and it was a couple whose wedding I witnessed 2 years ago. They have a little baby, 9 months old. And it was really interesting to see how good this kid was with his hands. Now, I'm a celibate, I don't have any kids to speak of. Just a joke. I should not make that joke. I should not make that joke in the church today. At any rate, those of you who have raised children, you know that like when they're 2, 3, they might see, but they don't know how to coordinate. They don't know how to reach. They don't know how to move their hand to get what they're after. So you hang those little doodads up in the crib and they start working at them, and eventually they have to learn how to see. It's most striking when someone has never had sight, and through some miracle of surgery today, they have sight for the first time. It isn't like they're all coordinated. They have to learn again. Those of you in the medical world, you know that. So we take it for granted, but in fact, we went through a process of learning. There are a number of other examples that are very striking. For example, My mom and dad were raised on farms. Some of you know this. I've told this story before, but I've always been amazed. As a child, my dad would take me to the Ohio State Fair, huge gathering, like Iowa State Fair, a lot of farmers and so on. And one of the things that my dad would always take me to is when they judged prize cattle, beef. And to me, a cow is a cow. And he would say, no, look at this. This one is probably going to win. And he very often would be right. Some of you may have heard, any of you hear of Sister Wendy Beckett? Sister Wendy Beckett is out of this world. She is homely, do not judge by appearance. She's got buck teeth. She wore a habit all over her head. She's around like this, and she's absolutely articulate. And she's an art critic. And if I can recommend something to you, I show this to the USC students, and they're blown away. There's one guy with tattoos all over, and after I showed this video, his first comment was, she's one rock star, And what does she do? She's an artist, and she's going through the British Museum, and she's pointing out things, and you have to learn how to see. You have to learn how to see. Otherwise, it's just painting. There's the painting, let's go. It's like that terrible American couple that were heard at the entrance to the Louvre in Paris, one saying to the other, honey, you do this side, I'll do that. It's not good, not good. When I was doing my graduate studies in Toronto, there was a man in his late 50s whose son had become a priest. His wife died, and he decided to become a priest. He was a medical doctor, and and I saw him before he went on to the ordination, he was a tremendous diagnostician. There are doctors, and there are doctors. I hope I offend no one here, but there are some who really know how to diagnose. They listen, they watch, they observe, they listen to you, they sense something. This guy was like that. And you know what happened? He got ordained, and he became a doctor of the souls. He was an extraordinarily gifted confessor. People came from all over Toronto, that's where I did my work, and to go to confession to him, because he listened with the heart. So the question then, I think, for this reading, for all of us, is simply this. You can have 20/20 vision and be blind. How do we learn to see as God sees? And we're given a hint in the first reading where it says, God sees the heart. How do you see the heart? That's really a good question, I think. How do you see with the heart? How many of you don't have to show me your hands, but how many of you can look back over the years and pick out one or the other person who saw something in you that you didn't see yourself and said, you can do this. You have this ability. And you kind of go, well, I don't know, I don't really know. You do. They see in us what we never saw in ourselves. That's seeing with the heart. That's seeing a diamond in the rough, but the possibility that's there. A mentor, a great teacher, these are people that make that difference. A parent who knows how to encourage at the right time, the right amount, and to move someone further. That's seeing with the heart. So my question this Sunday, if we are going to be in the light of Christ, if we're going to see as God sees, if our baptism will be really a source of illumination, how do we do that? I think we do it by loving. By loving. The more we love, the more we see. And we have to be trained to see with the heart.